From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yeah, thanks very much, Natalie. Welcome to Thursday's programme. It's very humid today, 23 degrees in Salford and Greater Manchester, but it feels a lot warmer than that. It's very humid, I tells you. Hope you're well. It's August 8th, 2019. My name is Richie Allen. Love to hear from you today, as the Twitter handle is the same as always. It's at Richie Allen Show. Tell me what you're thinking. I will be reading your tweets as usual through the programme. Great to be with you today.
Richie Allen.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
I love it when listeners get in touch with me and they challenge me and they get me thinking. Ben Johnstone is one such listener. A few months ago, Ben sent me an email. He's in Australia and he's an activist. He goes out every week to talk about veganism with people on the streets of Sydney, and he's been doing that for many years. He's also worked with undercover animal liberation organisations, and he documents the conditions inside agriculture, industries and slaughterhouses and all the rest of it. And he took part in a film called Dominion, which millions of people have seen. And Ben's going to stay up really late for me. It'll be about 3 o'clock in the morning. In the second hour, Ben joins the programme live, and I can't wait to talk to him about veganism. And before that, Jim Fetzer joins the programme. Jim's been watching the events in El Paso, in Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, and he's got a lot to say about those, gun control, politics, Donald Trump, and all the rest of it. So Jim Fetzer joins the programme this hour. It is your Richie Allen Show. There is no other like it. Thanks for tuning in. And it's going to be the last live radio show for a couple of weeks, because I'll be taking my leave of you after this. I mentioned it in the week, and all is good with that. But I'm in fine fettle today and looking forward to what I think will be an interesting old show this Thursday. Climate change, dear listener. Climate change. I laughed out loud this morning. I read a story in the Telegraph that claimed experts, in inverted commas, believe that air turbulence in flight is getting worse because of climate change. And I had a good bit of fun with that on the Newspaper Review YouTube live stream earlier on. But the United Nations is banging on about our diet. Switching to a plant-based diet can help fight climate change, according to UN experts. A major report was released on how we use our land and climate change and how it's intertwined. And it says that we in the West are having too much meat and dairy produce, and that's fueling global warming. But scientists wouldn't explicitly call on everyone to become vegan or vegetarian. They said that more people could be fed using less land if we cut down on eating meat. This was a report that followed discussions in Geneva in Switzerland. Do you want to hear from a guy? His name is Jim Skea, or Skea, S-K-E-A, Jim. And Jim is the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's Working Group 3, whatever the bloody hell that means. Here's Jim.
25 to 30% of food produced is lost or wasted. And reducing food loss and waste can reduce pressure on land, improve food security, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, a move to more balanced diets could help us adapt to and limit climate change. Some diets require more land and water and lead to higher emissions than others. For example, diets that are high in grains, nuts and vegetables have a lower carbon footprint than those that are high in meat, and they lead to better health outcomes.
Right, so that was Jim Skea, IPCC Working Group 3. Top man, Jim. Right, Jacqueline Hanan is a soil scientist at Cranfield University. She's a soil scientist. No, she doesn't study people who soil their undercrackers. She studies soil at Cranfield University, and she fertilises the entire Sky News studio with this horse shit.
So what's happening is we're changing the vegetation on the land surface to grow food. So we're removing a lot of the native vegetation and replacing it with things like crops and other grassland systems. So this is changing the flux of gases that are released from the soils and also from those animals as well.
Is it sustainable then? Clearly not.
Well, a lot of the modelling has showed actually if we continue as a business as usual scenario, then this is not going to be sustainable. There's going to be more emissions from these areas.
Right. Oh, well, we've got to.
What kind of fuckery is this?
I couldn't resist it. What we've done, basically, the soil woman says that what we've done for hundreds of thousands of years, we've cleared away unused land, bush, grass, weed, bramble, not trees now, but grass, weed, bramble, the bush, and we've grown crops to feed ourselves. They want us to believe that is now killing the planet. But we need to farm, surely. We need to farm. Surely. Let's hear more from the soil expert woman, Ms. Hanan from Cranfield University. This gets better.
So if you think about, quite often in the winter, our fields are bare. We can
Quite often in the winter, our fields are bare. Yes, they are. So is my arse. But anyway, what about the fields?
can actually put vegetation on those soils. So, for example, the crop that we remove, so we harvest the wheat, we can put another cover crop, it's called, in between. So this actually then puts that vegetation back into the soil. We start to build carbon in those soils. We start to minimise the disturbance of soil. So ploughing actually disturbs the soil and releases a lot of carbon dioxide.
And releases a lot of carbon dioxide. Ploughing releases carbon dioxide. She's as mad as a box of frogs. Let's get cover crops. So the fields are bare in the winter, she says, after the wheat has been harvested, she says. So we can put a cover crop on there, vegetation, but ploughing the soil releases CO2 into the atmosphere, she says, but she wants to plough more. How many months in a year does the scientist think there are? She wants to do more ploughing. And by ploughing, throw more CO2 up in the air. And the presenter just sits there and doesn't call out this manure. He's a stooge, is the presenter. His name is Dermot Murnaghan, Plastic Paddy, based in London. Have a listen to what he says next, because we know where this is going, don't we? Monsanto, don't we? Monsanto. We know where it's going. It's going to Monsanto. I think it is anyway.
Presumably GM crops have a role to play as well. They can be more productive, more resistant, less insecticide, less fertiliser required.
So people are working on those to actually improve the productivity, if you like, on the land surface, so increase production. Also to breed plants that then are more resistant to changing climate, so ones that are more resistant to high temperatures, for example.
Yes, we are fuckery, aren't we, scientists?
What kind of fuckery are you?
Yeah. Lovely. Well, we'll just turn it all over to the GM companies, and they will breed plants. They will manufacture seeds that are able to deal with the inevitability of climate change. Wow. Here's the great Piers Corbyn, of course, many times a guest on this programme. Scientist, meteorologist. He was on Talk Radio here in the UK last week. Piers obliterates the junk science that says man-made CO2 is going to kill us all, and share this little bit of audio with all of your non-believing friends. He absolutely obliterates the CO2 argument. Piers Corbyn.
The data shows that when you analyse temperatures and carbon dioxide, that carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures. So after the last ice age, for example, Antarctic temperatures, and you measure these by ice cores, went up, and then about 800 years later, the amount of carbon dioxide in the world went up. And the reason for the warming now, the reason for the extra CO2 now is a delayed effect from the medieval warm period. In the medieval warm period, extra CO2, which was emitted from the upper levels of the oceans, got subsumed by extra cold water from melt in Greenland going under the sea. So that cold water, which absorbs more CO2 than warm water, gobbled up extra CO2 that then circulates under the Atlantic, under the Pacific, and comes out again about 600 to 800 years later and emits its CO2. So that's why we have larger CO2 now. Man will have no effect on this CO2. And if man was really worried about CO2, if the powers that be were honestly worried, they should address the fact that termites produce 10 times more CO2 than man.
They do.
Man is only 4% of the total amount of CO2 produced, and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is only 0.04%.
0.04%, that's the truth. The atmosphere is made up of many gases, and 0.04% of the atmosphere is made up of carbon dioxide, CO2. You see, the whole thing is a lie. It's a very precarious lie. The whole thing is like a house of cards built by an epileptic. Fuck. Maybe I shouldn't have said. No, I'm going to say it. I'm out of here anyway after today. It's like a house of cards built by an epileptic. It's not going to hold any water. It's not going to stand up to any scrutiny. It's a lie. What else does Pierce say?
4%. So man is 4% of 0.04% of the atmosphere.
And presumably...
which is a trivial amount. But the point is that if man's CO2 is important, then the rest of nature has to obey man. So the termites have to obey man and produce more CO2 when the termites do. It's a conspiracy of nature. That's what they're telling you to believe in. It's a completely insane conspircy of nature.
And presumably
there's no evidence for it whatsoever.
None. Zero.
Only evidence against it.
And presumably the minuscule makeup of this country in terms of the man-made CO2 in that 4% is even less, right?
It's, dare I say, like pissing in the wind.
Pissing in the wind, that's a scientific term. Pissing in the wind. Piers Corbyn. It's a lie. It's a lie, but they want to transform human experience in a way that the way we used to live would be unrecognisable to future generations. You can't do this, you can't do that. You cannot eat this, you cannot eat that. You cannot travel there. This is your allocation of meat for the month. We've got to save the planet. This is where we're going. Gotta chip ya. Gotta chip ya. Gotta chip ya, because if we don't chip you, we can't follow what it is you're doing and when you're doing it. I'm not being sensational here. I'm not being paranoid. This is the way it's going. It's lunacy. And as Piers Corbyn said there, it is based on a massive pack of lies. It wouldn't be so bad if it was a mistake, but it ain't a mistake. It's deliberate. Let's move on. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, repeated today that we will leave the European Union on Halloween, October 31st. But he dodged the question about whether he would disregard the will of Parliament if he lost the no confidence motion, because he might have to face one after summer recess. Would he stay on? Would he call an election for after the deadline and leave as planned if he lost the no confidence motion? His advisor Dominic Cummings has been saying members of Parliament do not get to ignore the will of the people. His advisor has been saying it's outrageous to demand that the Prime Minister obeys the will of Parliament. He wants to obey the will of the people. So it's an interesting thing, this. Anyway, here's Johnson speaking this afternoon to the media.
We are going to leave the European Union on October the 31st, which is what the people of this country voted for. It's what MPs voted for, and that's what I think the parliamentarians of this country should get on and do.
You're not concerned about disregarding the will of Parliament?
I think that MPs should get on and deliver on what they have promised over and over and over again to the people of this country. They will deliver on the mandate of 2016 and leave the EU on October the 31st.
Yeah, they are. 31st. Now, you know the way I bang on about Parliament all the time and sovereignty? I bore you to death. I know I do. I know the tears are spilling down your face. I know you age 15 years every time I bring this up. But it's good. We live in a constitutional monarchy. It isn't sovereignty. It isn't a democracy. And I bang on all the time about the fact that the politicians have no power whatsoever. Hence, there isn't any point really in voting for any of them. And you sometimes get back to me and say you're talking through your arse, sonny. And I say, well, I don't think so. Have a listen to Andrew Smith. He's a historian. He's a constitutional historian, and he was on Sky News this morning. He was arguing with a woman. He was arguing, so he was. Can you believe it? There was a woman on Sky News, and she was saying the people are sovereign. Andrew Smith lays out on Sky News in a way that I've never heard a guest lay it out before, that there's no such thing as democracy in the UK. Here he is talking about sovereignty, And the Crown, you ready?
But again, ideas of where sovereignty lies. I think I would take issue with what Ruth says. Sovereignty lies in the Crown in this country. That's the reality.
I agree about that. I agree
the
about
difficulty I have is that idea of the people's will I find really quite objectionable, because I don't think it's immutable, I don't think it's singular, and I don't think it's certainly sovereign in any way.
Oh! What did he just say there? Listen carefully.
Sovereignty lies in the Crown. In the
Sovereignty lies in the Crown. Remember that.
This country, that's the reality.
And she agrees with him, by the way.
I agree about that. I agree about that.
I agree.
Difficulty I have,
and he has a lot of difficulty with the people having any power whatsoever. He has grave difficulty with you, me, or anybody else having any sovereignty.
Is that idea of the people's will I find really quite objectionable, because I don't think it's immutable, I don't think it's singular, and I don't think it's certainly sovereign in any way.
Yeah, and the presenter, of course, Dermot Monaghan, Plastic Paddy, this morning just ignored that, because if he had dared to venture down that road and ask him, what do you bloody mean, the historian would have explained what he meant about constitutional monarchy. It doesn't matter a damn. Charles Bronson could be released from prison. For my American listeners, there's a poor mad bastard called Charles Bronson, not Charles Bronson from Death Wish and The Evil That Men Do. There's a guy called Charles Bronson, and he's in some psychiatric hospital. Apparently he's very violent, but his crimes outside, he never murdered anybody, never stabbed anybody, no attempted murder, no kidnap, no rape. He's locked up forever because he's deemed to be a danger to society. You could vote Charles Bronson in. It wouldn't matter a damn who you vote in this country, what coalition government you have, which party leads, it matters not. The historian basically laid it on the line for you, so he did. No such thing as democracy here. No such thing as sovereignty. This is the Richie Allen Show, by the way. Hi to Philip Dunbar, to David Stanford. How you doing, David? Who says, yes, eat GMO for climate change, or you're a racist, fascist, planetophobic extremist and could commit a future act of terror. Get that sugar-laced corn juice down you, or we will throw away the key. That's excellent. And a very succinct point by Patricia Braunschweiler in Zurich. GMO food, says Patricia, increased production and in the meantime decreased nutritional value. Sadly, there are actually people who will believe these fools. It's wonderful, Patricia. You, through geoengineering and through other means, you destroy the soil, you force abiotic stress on the soil, nothing will grow, and then you come along with your frankenseeds and say, oh look, we've devised the seed, so we have, that will grow in the soil. Yes. But sadly, the seed and the crop will have health implications beyond our imaginations for people, for me, for you, and for our children. Hi to Andy Newman, hi to Liz Jones, how you doing, Liz? And to Sean Hinchcliffe, whose mother is 75 today. Happy birthday to your mother, Sean. I hope she's well. 75 not out, mate. I hope you're doing something really nice for your mummy, for your mammy. This is the Richie Allen Show. It's the last live radio show for a couple of weeks. My name is Richie Allen. Welcome to it, Salford in Greater Manchester. The time is 21 and a half minutes past the hour. Yes! And this is Deacon Blue. Jim Fetzer joins me live from Madison, Wisconsin in a couple of minutes' time. Can't wait for Jim. Keep those tweets coming in. Hi to Charlotte in Burnley. E-bagum. As I tear out the pages, back into Deacon Blue on the Richie Allen Show. Real Gone Kid, 25 minutes past the hour. Thursday's programme, August 8th, 2019. Welcome to the show. Thanks for the tweets, lots of them coming in. Nice to be with you this Thursday. Very serious issue, this big issue. President Trump visited he did not. He visited El Paso in Texas yesterday. He then went on to visit Dayton, Ohio, and he was given a mixed reception. Protests and feuds with local politicians and cries of racism. You know what this is about? 31 people died in the attacks in El Paso and Dayton, which took place within hours of each other over the weekend. One of the men allegedly involved, Patrick Crusius, is in custody. Is in the custody of the police in Texas, and the other man, the man allegedly responsible for the murders in Dayton, Ohio, was shot dead by the police, as you know. To talk about this, the implications of it, the anomalies around this particular series of events, let's welcome back to the programme a great friend of ours, somebody I've been speaking to for many, many years on my radio shows. He's kind of a doyen of critical thinking. He's an author. You can find his books even, and others at moonrockbooks.org, moonrockbooks.com. I'll put a link out to it now. In fact, let me just, it's moonrockbooks.com, in fact, moonrockbooks.com. Former Marine Corp veteran as well, and a man that I credit with waking a lot of people up to the inconsistencies in the story of September the 11th. Let's welcome back to the programme, live from Wisconsin, our friend Jim Fetzer. Jim, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Oh, Richie, I'm just delighted. I'm just delighted to be back with you again, my friend. You have such a sensational show. Now, what you've described is most certainly the narrative that the public is supposed to accept. But frankly, when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up, Richie. You got a guy who's driving 600 miles to a Walmart when there had to have been one within 45 minutes of his home. We have a photograph of him entering the Walmart. He's got these cargo pants with big baggy pockets on the outside. But then when he's arrested, when he's apprehended going out, he no longer has trousers with the big cargo pockets. What did he do in the middle of this mass shooting? Decide, well, I'm here at Walmart, I guess I'll pick up a new pair of trousers. No, not only that, but Jim Stone has made many brilliant points about this shooting allegedly lasting for 20 minutes. I mean, it's very easy to get out of a Walmart. He even talks about having parked 100 feet away with his wife waiting in the car, rushed in, gone through the express checkout line, and been back at his car in 3 minutes. If in fact there'd been a shooting there, the place could have been evacuated in about 90 seconds. He's also observing that the Walmarts are just loaded with cameras. Suppose there were 30 cameras that would have picked up the action here for 20 minutes. That's 600 minutes. That's 10 hours of footage, but we haven't seen any of it, Richie.
These are good questions, Jim. These are really good questions. They're important questions. And in the absence of any real media, it's important that people are asking these questions. I'll tell you what really annoyed me about the whole thing was on Monday, the police in El Paso said that the only reason Patrick Crusius stopped at that particular Walmart was because he was tired and he was hungry. And I said to myself, Jim, you know, I tried to be on the fence about these things, as you well know. You and I have butted heads over the years. I tried to be the devil's advocate. But don't tell me that the man carefully prepared a manifesto detailing why he was doing what he was doing, his hatred. Don't give me that impression that he was really well prepared and well planned. And then tell me on Monday that he just got tired of driving around and pulled over because he was hungry. It stinks, Jim, doesn't it? There's some, I have to agree with you on this particular shooting. With, you know, I've checked the references you gave me. You're right about the changed trousers. You're right about the CCTV. What's going on, Jim? Because I do believe that people get killed. Somebody killed somebody. What do you think is really going on?
Well, I think it's highly improbable that anyone actually died, Richie. These things appear to be completely staged. You know, I bring together the best experts on different of these cases, and beginning with Sandy Hook, but also Boston bombing, Orlando, Dallas, Charlottesville, Parkland, Las Vegas. I mean, these have all been staged events for political purposes, Richie. Think about this. What would we be talking about if it were not for the intervention of these events that purportedly took place in El Paso and Dayton?
Well, we might be talking about Iran. We might be talking about the neocon Zionist lunatics who want to have a war with Iran. That's one thing we might be talking about, right?
Yes, and the collapse of the Mueller report. You know, when Robert Mueller went into Congress, it fell flat. He wasn't familiar with his own report. He obviously hadn't authored it. He never heard of Glenn Simpson or Fusion GPS. It was a disaster for the Democrats. Not only that, Richie, but during these Democrat debates, some of those that have been the darlings of the Democrats, such as Kamala Harris, have been taken apart by other Democrats, in particular in that instance by Tulsi Gabbard. But you've had three major divisions emerge among the Democrats. You have the Squad with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and so forth on the one side. You have the Socialists, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in the center. And then you have the moderates like Tim Ryan, who are trying to convince the socialists that if they have all these free programs, the public's not going to buy it and they're going to lose the election. We would be talking about these things, which are very negative for the Democrats. In fact, I've already been projecting if the election were held now, Trump would have it in the bag. They needed to change the narrative. And nothing works better than having a violent event that can be propagandized. Richie, we've had 2.5 years of the Russia hoax, which turned out to have no foundation whatsoever, no basis, all a fabrication. Hillary Clinton and the DNC working with some corrupt individuals in the Department of Justice and the FBI. It was a conspiracy theory in the bad sense, just based on rumors, conjectures, and speculation. It has destroyed the myth. Even Rachel Maddow, who's been the biggest proponent of Russiagate, has now lost half of her viewing audience because it's been exposed to have been a hoax.
Definitely a hoax, Jim. Let me jump in. Definitely a hoax. Of course it is. And what you said about Clinton and the DNC, you're absolutely right. But Donald Trump is not a president worth defending, is he? And I say that, well, everybody is worth defending from a lie. So I should retract there. I would agree that Trump should be defended against lies told about him. But Trump is just another neocon Zionist president whose strings are pulled by people like Bibi Netanyahu and the hard warmongering right. Nothing Trump has done in the 2.5 years that he's been president has surprised me in the slightest. He's not honoured a single campaign commitment, not one. I'll get rid of crooked Hillary. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
I think that's not quite right, Richie, if I might disagree a bit. I think in terms of foreign policy, it's ironic because he was elected because he promised to get us out of the Middle East. That's where the phrase America First originated, talking about reallocating all the resources, trillions of dollars spent on these wars in the Middle East, without pointing out that, of course, that 9/11 was orchestrated by Bibi Netanyahu, by the CIA and the neocons in the Department of Defense, in order to create a justification for the U.S. moving into the Middle East and taking out the modern Arab states that had served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation with Iran. Well, we know it hasn't played out that way because of the intervention of Iran and Russia on behalf of the Syrian government. Richie, would you believe most Americans still do not know that Bashar al-Assad is a democratically elected president of Syria? Yeah. For example, Kamala Harris, in response to Tulsi Gabbard's surgical evisceration of her position because she claims to be a champion of social justice, have been attacking Tulsi as being supported by the Russians. What are we going to get? Another year of Russian involvement in order to try to save Kamala Harris. And you know, Richie, she was profoundly involved in the whole Jussie Smollett hoax in Chicago, where Jussie claimed at 2 a.m. he was assaulted by a couple of rednecks, except they turned out to be Nigerian bodybuilders. One was his personal trainer, the other an extra on the set of Empire. We even have video of them buying the supplies. He gave them a personal check for $3,700 to do this. It was a scandal. Well, he turns out to be the nephew of Kamala Harris. He campaigned for Kamala Harris. The attorney who dismissed the case regards Kamala Harris as her mentor. This is not going to go away, Richie, but Kamala has been trying to make a return. Tulsi Gabbard, who is very seriously underestimated, a very significant person. She has military experience. She has a non-interventionist foreign policy. She's an intelligent, articulate, very attractive candidate. And she is making, I think, a tremendous impact so that now, because she is a bona fide a non-interventionist and would get us out of the Middle East. And because she even has met with Bashar al-Assad, the Zionist forces are very alarmed and they're trying to target her. I think she is by far the single most interesting and promising among all the Democratic candidates. Now, studies showed by Boston University and the University of Minnesota that Trump won because it was rural voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin who believed that he was the less likely of the two candidates to continue the wars. And there can be no doubt about it because Hillary was such a rabid hawk. And they voted for him in the expectation, not in the certainty, but in the belief that he would get us out of the Middle East. That's why he was elected. That's the most important campaign pledge he made that he has not followed through on, to much of our dismay. I've been very critical of the extent to which he's been following a Zionist foreign policy. On the other hand, Richie, he's been calling out the fake news media. You know, the CIA began infiltrating the American media back in the 50s.
Yeah, but hang on, Jim. Let me jump in. I gave you a good run there without interrupting you. Hang on a second there, my friend. Jim Fetzer is our guest, folks. moonrockbooks.com. A lot of time for Jim. Very smart man. And he's honest enough to admit when maybe he called something wrong. Look, on Trump, you say he's calling out the fake news. Jim, he's a pathological liar. Jeffrey Epstein is looking like he's going to go down. And Trump has repeatedly stated that his contacts with Epstein or his relationship with him was a negligible one. He's lying. We know he's lying. We know that he's up to his neck in it with Epstein and Richard Branson and Prince Andrew here. You know, Trump is just another president. He's just another one in a long line of neocon Zionist puppets controlled by Tel Aviv and, you know, and the neocon hawks in DC. What do you make of this Epstein stuff, Jim? I mean, is Epstein going to make it to trial or what?
Well, I have two sources that offer a contrasting opinion to what you just articulated, Richie. And I've done research into Pizzagate. Pizzagate is most certainly real. Barack Obama himself was deeply involved. One of the revelations from the WikiLeaks John Podesta emails was that how Barack Obama had spent 25,000 taxpayer dollars to fly in pizza and hot dogs from Chicago. Well, that's slang in terms of sexual child abuse for little boys and little girls to the White House for a private party. That was Barack Obama. That was not Donald Trump. Now, Steve Pachenik, who knows the inside of the insiders as well as anyone and who's a champion for American truth and justice, has given Donald Trump a clean bill of health, even more tell in relation to this child abuse business in which Epstein is clearly so profoundly involved. I have no doubt it was a Zionist trap, a honeypot, to get video footage of these prominent politicians who, by the way, appear to include Hillary Clinton.
Oh, no doubt. But what about Trump? Hang on. No doubt. But if Trump was frequently going to... One of the things I've done is, you see, I've done some research on this as well. And I've looked back at reports on Google and Yahoo, reports going back 25, 30 years. And you look at the entertainment pages or the socialite pages of the New York and even the East Coast press in the United States, multiple mentions of Trump going to events hosted by Jeffrey Epstein and events at Trump's own Mar-a-Lago or Mar-a-Lago club. So why can't we consider the possibility that Donald Trump is where Donald Trump is today because he himself was compromised at one of these parties? Why not?
Well, you're entitled to believe it, Richie.
No, I'm not believing. I'm positing it.
Look. We had a defense attorney who's an attorney representing several of these child abuse victims. I watched the interview. The news guy was trying to get him to implicate Trump, and he said, "Well, look, I can tell you this. We sent out subpoenas to like 100 prominent individuals, and the only one who responded was Donald Trump. He said, come on in, sit down with me. We'll have a talk. I'll tell you everything I know." He said his interaction with Trump was quite valuable. The information Trump gave him was accurate, and it panned out. And I say between Steve Pachenik and this defense attorney representing the victims, I think Trump is not the guy you have characterized him as being.
No, I haven't. I've asked questions. Hang on, Jim. No, I have not. This is what I don't do. I'm asking questions. Epstein's own brother, Mark Epstein, said to the New York Post that Trump flew on Epstein's plane numerous times. That's Epstein's own brother. Mark Epstein is on the record.
Why would you take for granted that Mark Epstein is speaking the truth? I mean, look, but Bill Clinton.
Why would he lie?
Bill Clinton flew some 26 times. Well, because Trump's a president, if he can implicate him, maybe he can get him to give Epstein a pardon or a release. I don't think it's going to happen. I believe Trump has been serious about wanting to drain the swamp, Richie. Do you know that he's done so much for the economy? Do you know that right before the midterm, that Rasmussen, which has been most reliable in polling, had him at a 50% approval rating? He even had a 40% approval rating in the black community because he's getting so many jobs. We have the lowest unemployment rate for blacks and Latinos in the history of the country, Richie, because of Donald Trump. Now, I predicted, therefore, that he would pick up 3 or 4 seats in the Senate and keep the House. When that did not happen, I was profoundly puzzled. It would take a year before it was revealed that Google had manipulated their algorithms and shifted as many as 76 million votes to the Democrats. And they're promising to do it again. They don't like Donald Trump, and they're going to abuse their position once again.
Now, by the way, I've spent months, if not years, on radio programs calling out the Clintons. I must have said 1,000 times on this program that Bill Clinton travelled on Epstein's plane 26 times. I have no time for Bill or any politician. My point is Trump has lied, and people around Trump have lied about the closeness of his relationship with Epstein. I'm not saying that Trump is a pederast or anything like that. I wouldn't dare, because I don't have any proof of it. I'm just saying that for me, they're all the same. I've endorsed no politician ever. I don't vote for any of them. They are all the same. When they get to the White House, they are there only for one reason and one reason only, because they are compromised. At some way along the journey, they're compromised. That's my opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right. It's just my opinion. Back to you.
I understand completely. Let me follow up, by the way, on what's going on here. You see, the Democrats believe that gun control is a winning strategy for them. So we're getting nonstop demonization of Donald Trump as a racist. And believe me, there's no evidence to substantiate that whatsoever. This was created with Charlottesville, where they sought to transform him from an America first to an American nationalist, to a white nationalist, to a neo-Nazi. That's what's going on
Quick question, Jim. Quick question. What about telling black congresswomen who were born in America to go home? Is that not racist?
Well, look, Richie, this is very easy to misconstrue. He does use some rhetoric that is very strong that I don't particularly appreciate. But let me tell you this. We got Mayor Pete, for example, who's picking up on this gun control agenda, claiming America is under attack from homegrown white nationalist terrorists. That's just rubbish, complete rubbish. He says we're the only country in the world with more guns than people, and that it has not made us safer. But, Richie, it has made us safer. It turns out worldwide that gun ownership and homicide rates are inversely related. The more gun ownership, the lower the homicide rate. United States, Canada have the highest gun ownership in the world and lowest homicide rate. South American countries, Brazil, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. African countries, low gun ownership, high on homicide rate. Russia, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. You must know in the UK, when they banned guns, people didn't stop killing other people. They just resorted to knives.
Yes.
I said when they reported that there was many homicides now in London as there were in New York City, what are they going to do next? Ban potato peelers? Richie, that's what they did. They banned potato peelers. I've just seen a stunning video from Germany where an ISIS guy wielding a samurai sword dispatched, absolutely chopped into pieces, a German civilian. Is that what you want? In fact, it turns out that these events, these shooting events, occur in gun-free zones. Richie, Chicago is a stunning illustration. How can anyone not realize that Chicago has the most stringent gun control laws in the nation, but also the highest gun violence? What we need is a national concealed carry. It would bring the gun violence rate down to practically zero.
So let me ask you on that. Moonrockbooks.com. Jim Fetzer is our guest. It's about time Jim is back on the programme. Good to have Jim back on. Right. I think, we're not going to waste our time arguing because you and I come from different points of view. I think a lot of the shootings maybe are not staged. Maybe they're false flags. I think maybe you're 60 or 70% right. Now, you might be 100% right. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying, being the devil's advocate and looking at it from a dispassionate point of view, I think that sometimes people get guns and they go crazy and they kill people. It happens. However, I'm not saying that, everybody should lose their guns because of that. So I want to make my position clear. I am very interested in why so many patriots, so many serious-minded people who are very interested in politics, conservatives mostly, why they feel, this is not a loaded question, Jim, because we've talked about this before, they really seem to believe that the government is coming for their guns. Now, is that true, or is there an exaggeration there? Do you think there is an agenda? Is there an agenda, an active one, to disarm every American man and woman of sound mind in the country today? Is there an agenda to disarm everybody?
It's my opinion there is such an agenda, and it's largely a Zionist agenda, believe it or not, Richie, that the Zionists want to take the guns. It's fascinating because it's coupled with a massive censorship by the social media giants. I've had one video after another taken down by YouTube. I've had blogs taken down. I have been censored right and left. What is going on is they don't want exposure that these events are false flags. You talk about Moonrock Books. We have books on Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando and Dallas, Charlottesville, Parkland, one forthcoming on Las Vegas. I'm telling you, all those events, I bring together the best experts, and we have been able to demonstrate. I'm not saying this is a mere matter of opinion. We've been able to prove each one of those was a completely contrived event. The school at Sandy Hook, for example, had been closed by 2008. It was loaded with asbestos and other biohazards, damaged by a hurricane. There was even a major flood in 2007.
Now we've talked. Hang on, Jim. Hang on. We've talked a lot about Sandy Hook in the past, and I know. Yeah. Hang on. The last thing in the world I want anybody to think is that I'm trying to shut you down or censor you. I'm not. I'm happy to talk about Sandy Hook, but our time is limited today. But we're going to go to the top of the hour, and I know you've made in your books some really interesting points. And that's not patronising you. You've asked some very interesting questions about Sandy Hook and the build up to it, the day itself, and all of that. And I'm happy to hear that. And I will get you back on in the early autumn to go into that because of the legal case. But I want to stay with something you said a minute ago. Because I've got friends, not too many, but one or two Jewish pals in Manchester, and I know there are Jewish people listening. And they will say, why is Fetzer saying the Zionists are to blame for the agenda to take away guns? What difference does it make to Zionists or American Zionists? It's not they will say it's not a Zionist thing, it's a government thing. The government wants to disarm people. Why are we trying to blame Zionists on it? We blame Zionists for enough. Why are we blaming them for this?
It's really fascinating, Richie, because it's a very complicated issue. But from the time that the CIA began infiltrating the media back in the 1950s in Operation Mockingbird to 1975, when William Colby, then its director, testified to Congress that the agency owned everyone of any significance in the media, to today, where there's massive Zionist domination of the press. I have 100 photographs of 100 executives from CNN, every one of whom is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. I have another 100 from NBC, every one of whom is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. I have another 100 from New York Times, every one of which is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. If you go back and look at the statements made by Israeli leaders like Bibi Netanyahu himself, he's talking about sucking America dry and then destroying it and discarding it to benefit Israel and then throwing away like we do with other countries we hate. Now, that's not just some random Israeli in the street. That is the Prime Minister of Israel.
You'll have to send me a link to that quote. I want to make one other. Do send me that quote so I can say. I want to make one other point, and it's not a dig now, my friend below the belt, because I've known you years. But if somebody is listening to this for the first time, they'll have heard you talk about Sandy Hook, and they might be listening to this program for the first time ever. They'll say, "Isn't that guy the guy who lost the defamation suit with Lenny Posner? Isn't that the guy?" Hang on, let me finish. Isn't that the guy whose book publisher apologized to the Posners and agreed to take the book out of circulation?
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating. What a complicated situation. We did nothing wrong. Look, the death certificate that we published in the book is a fabrication, exactly as we described in Connecticut. It's not legal even for parents to have a death certificate that's uncertified. That death certificate is uncertified. It came to me by way of Kelly Watt, who got it directly from the plaintiff, Lenny Posner. They went to great length to try to switch the topic to a different death certificate that was certified, that was attached to the complaint, which we'd never seen before or published about. What would you believe, Richie? I got 2 expert document examiners who not only have confirmed that the death certificate in the book is a fabrication, but that the 3 other death certificates that have surfaced during the trial are also fabrications. One of them says it's mind-boggling how the state of Connecticut is issuing fabricated death certificates and even different fabricated death certificates to different parties to the litigation. He's concluded that anyone who receives a state-certified document from the state of Connecticut cannot assume that it's a reliable document. The other, even more highly qualified, has confirmed the findings of the first and gone further and observed that the Social Security card by Noah Posner, who is the subject of this death certificate, is also a fake. We had previously ascertained that the passport for Noah Posner, which Lenny also put up on the blog, where he directed Kelly Watt to find it, is a counterfeit. We have been able to establish that Noah Posner was a fiction made up out of photographs of his older stepbrother, Michael Vabner, as a child.
Why didn't this move the judge then? Why didn't that? If all of this is true, and you and I have butted heads about this several times over the years, we don't mind. We've got thick skin, you and I. We can argue with each other. I've taken the point of view of Posner when we've spoken before. I look at Posner. I don't see a pathological liar. I don't see the guy being a fraud. That's just me. Why didn't the judge take into account all the things you're telling me? And why did he rule that you had defamed the family? Why? As brief as you can.
He violated the constraints for a summary judgment that allow a judge to make a decision only when there are no disputed facts. But the most central issue in this case, the authenticity of the death certificate, was massively disputed. He just set aside all of my evidence. Richie, he was talking with a plaintiff's attorney about whether Mike Palachuk, my co-defendant, and I would even be allowed to speak during the trial for damages, where they're suing for $1 million from each of us. When it took place, before I was allowed to give my oral argument. It was that bad. The bias of the judge was simply overwhelming. It was an improper ruling. The most basic facts are still disputed, and he ruled in spite of it. He set aside the expert document examiners on the ground that was just their opinions, as though all opinions were on a par.
Tell me this, Jim. Tell me this. Look, the thing about you is I've known you for years. You're obviously incredibly intelligent, and again, that's in no way to patronise you, but it's baffling to me. This, I mean, it really is. I want to get into this with you again in the near future. Right?
They played their cards. Their strongest hand, which was getting through this summary judgment, it's clearly abusive. There's a whole lot of legal cases about the abuse of summary judgments in defamation cases, which is what we have here. I have submitted an appeal to the Court of Appeals here to review the entire case. It's called an interlocutory appeal. It's not obligatory of them to accept it, but the evidence of the kind I've outlined to you here is documented in the appeal to the court in spades. And Richie, I'm very pleased to announce now that yesterday I met with the attorney. For the first time, I have legal representation. He's a member of a major law firm right here in Madison. They have 50 or 60 attorneys, and here's an irony. Their office is in the very same building with the appeals court.
I know you'll keep us informed, Jim. I said to you before, I don't know whether people did or didn't die at Sandy Hook. I don't know. I've read your book, as you know, and I find, it's very well put together. You ask a lot of questions. But sometimes I look at the Posners and others and I think, well, some of those questions were answered. I'm not getting into it now. Don't jump down my throat. I think you are sincere. I've always believed you. In terms of, I've always believed that you believe 100% in what you're doing and saying. I wouldn't have anything to do with you if I didn't believe that you believed it. Now, it doesn't matter to me whether it's true or not. I'm this passionate guy, but I believe that you believe what you're doing.
I'm not only a former Marine Corp commissioned officer, but I am a distinguished McKnight University professor emeritus. I've now published over 36 books. My reputation is my stock in trade, Richie. I wouldn't take any of these stands if I couldn't prove it. I spent 35 years offering courses in logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning. I'm an expert in the relationship between hypotheses and evidence. The point I'd like to make here before we have to part is that Mayor Pete, for example, suggested the CDC ought to do studies about gun violence. Well, the CDC has already done a study with the National Academy Institute of Medicine and National Research, and they reported about the defensive use of guns, Richie. This is never discussed in the public press, the defensive use of guns. Almost all national surveys estimate defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive use by criminals, with estimates of annual usage ranging from 500,000, that's 500,000, to 3 million a year. It turns out there's an estimate saving the lives of 162 to 200,000 Americans every year because of defensive gun use, where if they hadn't had guns to defend themselves, they'd be dead.
They might have died.
The Democrats are promoting the death of Americans by wanting to take away their right to defend themselves.
That's the final word, and I'm a man who keeps his word. I won't add anything to that except to say, I think when you talk about that agenda, I think you present very hard evidence that it's real. You and I have spoken over the years about posse comitatus, how that's been eroded. We've got the military on the streets now pretending to be police officers. It's a nightmarish situation that's unfolding. Let me sincerely wish you the best with the conclusion of the trial. I hope you're right, because it would be terrible if if you were wrong, for you anyway. In terms of, because I know you're a moral man, I know you're a decent man, and I know that you wouldn't be saying these things if you thought there was any doubt. But, I have a lot of sympathy for some of the family members that I've seen as well. I can't get my head around it. But look, all I do is present a platform to listen to everybody. I like you. I think you're incredibly bright. Your academic credentials are second to none. And I think you've got a bloody right to ask questions. And you'll always be welcome here, mate. And I wouldn't dare patronise you, Jim.
It's always a pleasure being with you, Richie. I think you got the best talk show in the world.
Jim, you're a gent. Come back and talk to us real soon. Jim Fetzer, live on the line from Wisconsin even. Cheers, Jim. Moonrockbooks.com if you want to find out more about that. Jim Fetzer there. The man responsible, one of the men responsible for throwing suspicion on and throwing questions at the whole September the 11th narrative. A die-in when it comes to that. We wouldn't have half the information that we have about 9/11 if it wasn't for the efforts of Jim Fetzer, top man there. Right, okay, it's coming up for a minute to the top of the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. It's live on Thursday, August 8th, the 8th of the 8th, 2019. Do tweet the programme. It's at Richie Allen Show. I've neglected the tweets. Let me scroll on down there and read some of your tweets. Hi to Martin in Spain. How you doing, Martin? Hi to Ricky Emmett. How you doing, Ricky? Hi to Steve O, who says, thanks, Richie. I thought you were going to let him off the hook. Forgive the pun. No, I was going to... Well, I didn't plan on diving into it today because the case is still pending. The sentencing or the decision on how much compensation that Jim and his writing partner are going to have to pay. So I hadn't entirely planned on getting into it. But when Jim got into it, he opened the door for me to get into it. That's how it works with me. Hi to John Byrne. John says, Richie, Trump said he will section people who spread dangerous ideas or conspiracy theories. Yes, he did. And I get the irony, John. And I could have mentioned that, couldn't I? Jim Fetzer might be somebody who might need to be a bit worried about some of the things that Donald Trump is saying. John says Trump is getting rid of the First Amendment to save the Second. Guns before free speech, says John Byrne there. Yeah. Patricia wasn't happy about Jim saying that Donald Trump is not a racist, but I did challenge him, Patricia. I did say to him, what about telling black women born in the United States of America to go home? I said, is that not racist, Jim? I do my job sometimes, you know. I do my job sometimes. I'm going to take a musical break and then we're off to Sydney, Australia. And I'm excited about this. It should have happened before now. Ben Johnstone, who's an activist, animal rights, much more than that, got in touch with the programme. He's a listener and he supports the programme, and he dropped me a donation a few months ago, and when he sent the donation, he sent me a nice note too. Shall I read the note? Shall I? A brief note. Let me read it. And after I read it, we'll take a bit of music. And then we'll get him on. He's stayed up really late in Sydney. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I think he told me it's 3 o'clock in morning. 3 o'clock in morning over there. So let me read this. So anyway, he said, for what it's worth, I agree with most everything that you say on your show, Richie. He didn't have to say that. That was very nice. He says, your recent vociferous opining regarding the useful idiots from Extinction Rebellion, I feel, is a little misplaced, writes Ben. Not in their antics or the ludicrous position of man's activities driving climate change, but how adamantly you defend meat consumption. Just for the record, Richie, I am fundamentally opposed to the policing of people's purchases through smart technology, as I know you are. Although there is a legitimate environmental, health, and most importantly, an ethical concern buried in the rhetoric that I feel is worthy of addressing. If we wish to escape the jackboot of violent tyranny from those who oppress us, how can we ignore and participate in similar or worse treatment towards animals? I'd be more than happy to debate or discuss this topic should you wish, or I can recommend others. Wrote Ben a few months ago. Well, why do we get others? We'll get Ben on because he's an activist, and he participated in a film called Dominion, which I watched bits of today, which is a terrific film which came out of Australia a couple of years ago. Millions of people have watched it, and I think it's definitely worth discussing. So Ben Johnstone joins us live from Sydney in a moment after this from Slowhand himself, Eric Clapton. From the movie The Colour of Money with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, Eric Clapton. It's in the way that you use it. This is your Richie Allen Show, 6 minutes past the hour. Europe's most listened to independent talk radio show. And my name is Richie Allen. Great to be with you. Thanks for the tweets this evening. Right, this is a very serious issue because I mentioned on the programme some time ago, around about the time I was 16 years old, I was watching ITV at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I've had insomnia my entire life. And there was a film on really late, like it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was about slaughterhouses. I was 16. This is a true story. And I was sickened by the film. Now, it wasn't an expose of very bad practices. This was general practice. And it put me off. And for the next 4 years, all I really ate, maybe even 5 years, was fish and pastas and vegetables. That's true, that. Until, I suppose, probably my second or third year at uni. It was a few years, and then I tentatively began eating meat again. Why? I don't know. I was in my early 20s then. We have a strange relationship with food, don't we? Most of us. And I want to talk about that now. I read the email I had from Ben Johnstone before the music there. And he's an activist, this Ben, who works every week on the streets of Sydney as a vegan outreach activist, talking to people about veganism, talking to people about animal rights and animal welfare. And he's done some undercover work as well with animal liberation organisations. And he's helped to document the conditions that, awful conditions at times inside agriculture, factories, meat factories, slaughterhouses, and all of that. That's not nice work. But he's passionate, he's committed, And it's about time we got into this issue. He's stayed up, so he has, in the small hours of the morning there in Sydney. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme Ben Johnstone. Ben, thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening to the show and supporting it, mate. Most importantly, but thanks for staying up and giving us your time. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, mate. How's it going yourself?
Sure, it's not too bad at all. You're coming up for 3:10 in the morning, is that right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, just before we continue, I'd just make a quick correction there. I've never actually worked for any of these groups. Everything I do independently with other activists. Nothing's paid, nothing's anything like that. I do it all strictly off my own back with other activists. So.
Thanks, Ben. I shouldn't have said worked with. Yeah, my apologies. So it's all independent. Where did it start for you?
Where did veganism start or the activism start?
Both, Ben. When did veganism start and how did you get into activism?
Well, I actually went vegetarian when I was 16. Maybe, I think it was around the time you were just saying you did there as well. And I can't even remember what the catalyst was. I think I watched something myself, and it wasn't even necessarily something directly related to slaughterhouses or consuming animals. But, as human beings, we all say that we love animals and we have, such a strong connection with them. But yet our actions in those endeavors, in those areas, are totally opposite to that. So I made that connection at 16 and I went vegetarian without realizing, so much of what happens in things like the dairy and the egg industries as well, which, maybe we'll get into later on if you want. But I was vegetarian for the next 15 or so years without realizing that there was this additional thing called veganism, and like I said as well, the other even non-dietary aspects of what we do to animals, the animals that we wear, the cosmetic testing, and et cetera, and those sorts of things as well. So about 5 years ago, I made that connection, and I've been vegan ever since. And it wasn't long after that I realized that there was this whole other side of, speaking up for animals and, all the various forms in which that can be done. And being the kind of person that I am, always wanting to try and stick it to the system and everything like that, going as far with it as I can and, doing, stepping outside the law, so to speak, and, doing the undercover stuff and going into these horrible places and documenting the kind of things that, people would be oblivious to otherwise. I think it's a very powerful thing for me to do as well. Obviously very, very difficult at times, but something that I do love to do and I'm very proud of doing. But for me, the most important thing is the individual conversations with people on the streets, every day, every week. That's where the true change is going to happen. So, yeah.
Tell us about the undercover stuff. Not in any way now trying to get you into any trouble, of course not, but no. Tell us about that. You get wind of a company or a producer that's slaughtering animals and that some bad stuff is going on. And I have to say this, some of the stuff in Dominion, it's dreadful, it's awful to watch, and I believe it, and I believe it's going on, and I believe it's widespread. I use liveleak.com quite a bit. It's a great website, and other activists around the world have smuggled videos out of places, and it's horrendous. So how does it work then, Ben? You will get some information that something is not right. Now, I know you will think something is not right, full stop. You don't believe in slaughtering animals, full stop. But there are laws, and you will get wind that some producer is operating outside the law, and then you say, right, I'm going to get in there and document this. How does that work? I mean, it's risky stuff, that, I would imagine.
It definitely can be. And I suppose just to be completely honest as well, like there's the rescue and the liberation side, which for me I probably engage in more than the filming myself. I'm not necessarily such a technical person, so a lot of the times these things will go hand in hand. So there'll be a rescuing element to it, getting some animals out, being able to tell the story of these animals and giving them the chance at freedom that millions if not billions of them every year don't get, as well as the capturing of the images as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to any specific company or any specific action. Like obviously we have, gotten wind of various things. Like there might be a slaughterhouse that has been doing, quote unquote worse things than others. And you're right. Obviously, it was a good point that you made at the start with, not being the worst of the worst and things like that. It's just everyday standard practice. And this is the stuff that sort of turns people off most of all. It doesn't have to be the worst. Like you mentioned the stuff in Dominion. It's horrible, but I could show you much worse stuff. There's definitely worse things that happen, but for the most part, just focusing on the standard practices is the most important thing. And it just stops people from being able to say, well, you're showing the worst of the worst. And you do get people that say that sort of stuff anyway. But so we'll go in. Obviously, you got security sort of procedures you got to go around. So for the most part, if it's, in going into a factory farm or a slaughterhouse, you'll have to do some reconnaissance to determine what sort of security is at the site, whether they have people operating 24/7. So for the most part, we need to focus on places that don't operate 24/7. So you've got a window of time to get in there when no one's there, and it'll either be a matter of setting up the cameras in various hidden locations over the points of slaughter if you're wanting to focus on the actual slaughter of the animals per se itself, or if it's you're documenting the conditions in a particular factory farm or just a farm in general, just to expose. For me, it's not about exposing individual acts of where workers have gone over and above what they should be doing, what the regulations say they can be doing. Because like I said, at the end of the day, it's all terrible, it's all violent, it's all unnecessary. But just showing the standard everyday practice, for me, that's the most important, rather than just focusing on, one individual act of where someone, beat the crap out of an animal when they shouldn't have done it, which absolutely happens and it's horrible. But yeah, it's for me, it's about the individual. Oh, sorry, not the individual. About the everyday standard practices and procedures, getting that out. So,
there's a slaughterhouse across the river, or there was in Waterford City, where I come from, across the River Shore. I think it was at one time owned by Goodman, Larry Goodman. Maybe I'm not remembering the name properly, but we knew lads who worked there, and I knew a lad who worked there who quit after working there for 6 or 7 years, and he was on a kill line, and he stopped, and it had a profound effect on him, the job he had done. And I interviewed him for local radio at the time about animal welfare, and I asked him about people being abusive to animals, and was it a common enough thing? And he said, yeah, it's common enough for people to be abusive to animals, kicking them and punching them. And I said, well, I can't imagine I can't imagine most people working there being psychotic or being abusive by nature, Ben. And he said to me, I think, and he was really articulate, the guy, for a guy who left school when he was very young. I remember he said to me, I think the job itself, he said, is so horrible that you turn against the animals. You're doing it. You're doing this job because it's all you can do, and it's the money, and you have to live, and all the rest of it, and you have to have your wage coming in. The doing of the job, it's such a horrible environment that it has a profound impact on you. And for some people, he said, that's why they take it out on the animals. Does that mean anything to you?
Absolutely. I mean, truer words were never spoken in so many ways. When you're given such power over another living being, something, I think all animals are innocent, but something that's so defenseless, so powerless to the situation that they're in, it's only natural. Like, we see it in human beings as well. Like, a couple of weeks ago, you've been speaking, and I know it's come up on the show before, about what happens in, prisoners of war situation, where, what was it in I can't remember, was it the Iraq War or something like that, where that came out about... Yeah,
Abu Ghraib, ordinary people doing horrendous, unspeakable things to other people, and maybe they wouldn't have done those things in another environment, yeah.
If we're willing to do that, we have that we have the capacity for it. I'd say, we're empathetic, kind, caring beings, but we have that capacity in us as well to, to switch off and do the most heinous things to other people. Imagine what we can do to animals when, we're literally given carte blanche to, do whatever you want. I mean, at the end of the day, the animal's there to be slaughtered. And yes, there are regulations and procedures and practices about how it's meant to happen. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're taking a life. Like what does that look like? It's a violent act. And, when you give people that autonomy, that power, it's only natural that those sorts of things happen. But, in many ways, the workers of these industries as well are victims as well. And, they do have a choice to be there or not. Obviously, we're all a slave to the system. We all need to pay our bills and everything like that. Lots of people wouldn't want to be there. They exploit country workers in these locations where there's few other opportunities. They exploit migrant workers as well by sticking them in these places as well. Most people don't want to be there. I'm sure if given the choice to do something they'd rather do, they wouldn't do it. But over time, can you imagine if that was your job to slit a cow's throat, slit a pig's throat for 8 hours a day? It's going to change you. It's natural.
And Ben knows well, because we've communicated. I don't eat very much meat these days. That's the truth, not a cop-out now, because I'm speaking to Ben. I don't believe in telling lies. There was a time when I ate a lot of meat, and I'm not going to lie and say that I'm eating less meat now because of my conscience. I would be a liar if I said that. I'm eating less meat now because I just don't eat as much food, full stop. In general, I eat a lot of vegetables and salads and stuff like that. But I have been thinking for a couple of years about my relationship with the food that I eat and where it comes from. So a couple of questions for you. I know you've heard these before. Ben Johnstone is our guest. I'm delighted Ben is on. He's in Sydney, Australia, and Ben's an activist. He's an animal welfare activist, and I have a lot of time for him, to be honest. I'm going to ask you a few questions that people would ask me or would expect me to ask you. Now,
yeah, sure.
And I know you've heard these. Animals kill animals for food, and some people might argue, sound like a Fox News presenter now, some people would argue, but
yeah, right.
Others might argue that animals in the wild suffer very violent deaths. Sometimes they do. What's wrong with us keeping animals in open spaces where they're not being kicked around, where they're not cooped up in pens, raising them for food, and then slaughtering them in the most humane way possible? What is really wrong with us doing that when animals eat one another in the wild, and the death, the end, might be very, very violent? I know you've been asked this a million times, but I'll ask you again. It's a point people would make.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I would say humane slaughter is an oxymoron, but anyway, just to cover the question there. I mean, animals, true obligate carnivores, lions, tigers, etc. They kill out of necessity. They have no other option. There's no salad bar for the lions and tigers to go to. I mean, would it if I could wave my magic wand and make no animals kill each other animals? I would if I could, but obviously I can't do that. And 2/3 of the animals on the face of the earth are herbivores anyway. It's only about 1/3 of them that are carnivores. So they kill out of necessity. We don't. It's conclusively proven, I would say, and the health aspects of veganism and how much healthier we can be without it. So it's not a matter of necessity for us where it is for them. And also, I mean, we're moral agents. We know the difference between right and wrong, and we establish our societies based on these sorts of things. And, if we don't need to do something violent, why would we do it? Whereas, the animals that have to do it. They have to do it. So
fair enough. Okay. Another question. This came up with David Icke some years ago. I don't know where we were, David Icke and myself. We were having a beer somewhere, I think, and some guy came up to us, and I think he was vegan, and he was having a go at us because I posted a picture of David and myself at a jerk chicken joint. This is about 6 years ago. We weren't actually buying chicken, actually, strangely enough. There was a guy there we were meeting. Anyway, long story short, the guy was giving abuse to David because he assumed that David would be vegan. And he isn't, or at least he wasn't up until I last spoke to him a year or so ago. So the guy said, look, what do you think? And David said to him, what about this argument, David said, that every life on the planet is worthy of life, or every life form is sentient and thinks for itself and has its life? So could you not say the same about plants and vegetables? And I laughed out loud when he said it because I thought he was taking the piss. I thought, well, he's been a bit childish there. Then I thought about it and I thought, all right, it's an interesting point. Now, I know again, vegans have been asked this over the years. What's different about plants that we take out of the ground, thereby ending their life? What's the difference?
Well, I mean, just to sort of qualify as well, veganism isn't about perfection. I mean, as far as I know, there's no way to live on the face of this earth without causing at least some level of impact. So it's just about minimizing the harm as much as practically possible, which is essentially all veganism is. So, I mean, people do bring up this argument every now and then. It's usually, no one usually believes it. It's usually just a throwaway argument that people think, I'll put this out there. I don't believe it, but it'll get a reaction, everything like that. So no one really believes it. And I'll go further than most people ever would. I think that, plants are, trees and things like that are amazing, amazing creations. And, who am I to say exactly how sentient a tree or a plant really is? If we had sciences that that truly wanted to explore these answers and looked into it, maybe we'd find out things that we don't know, but obviously we don't. But at the end of the day, once again, it's just about living as kindly and with as minimal impact on life as possible. And plants don't have a central nervous system at the end of the day, so at least in that scientific aspect, they can't feel or they aren't sentient to the extent that we understand that they are. But if it was possible to do it without it, then brilliant. But it's obviously not.
Good answer.
No one believes this argument anyway. And if people honestly think that pulling an apple from the tree or pulling a carrot from the ground is the same as slitting a cow's throat, well, there's not much I can say to that, really. So
yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Do you think if people watch Dominion, I mean, it's hard for me. I mean, I had my experience when I was 16. You had yours. I don't know why I went back. I know I was very ill in my early 20s. At one stage, I was very ill, and I lost a lot of weight. And coming back from it, I had some chicken, and I think it maybe kind of went from there. Do you think if people, I mean, we know that people have no idea where their food is sourced, the majority, and that's not to suggest that people are stupid. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I know life is tough for people, and they go about their lives, and you know, they spend, they do their job, they come home, they try and pay their bills, so they go to a bloody supermarket. I think all of this began with supermarkets personally. So you go to the supermarket, you go to the fridge section, you pull out some trays of meat. Most people couldn't give a damn. They don't look into it. Now, again, I'm not trying to virtue signal at all. We do. You know, we source organic, and to the best of our ability, when we do buy meat, we to the best of our ability try to figure out to make sure that meat has been sourced from farms where animals are not kept in pens and are not suffering with illnesses and sores and all the rest of it. Right? I'm not trying to win you over here now at all, or try to get you to sympathise with me, because I know you won't. But we do. But most people, they don't. Do you think if they got to see the things that you've seen, and you've seen some unspeakable things, kind of shock therapy, do you think enough people would say, well, that's it, I'm not eating again, I'm not eating meat again?
Well, one of the first questions I usually ask people, like when I'm talking on the street, if it comes up, and it's a good thing to get out of the way, is, do you think you need to do this to be healthy? Because, I mean, if people think they physically need to consume animal products to be healthy, and obviously just to qualify again, there are aspects of veganism that don't relate to the diet, but the diet's the thing that gets the most attention, and it's what most people focus on. But if people physically think they need to consume the flesh of animals, or, their byproducts like milk and eggs, then they're obviously going to do it regardless of where it comes from. So it's an important thing to get out of the way. And most people now will say, no, we don't need to do it to be healthy. So it's really, really good that that's getting out there. But I mean, obviously for me, it doesn't really, the animal could have, they could live in paradise, and it could be, taken into a lovely field and played lullabies and patted and put to sleep that way. And to me, obviously that's not going to make a difference. But yeah, if people knew, like, I think we're naturally kind, empathetic beings. The thought of, animals suffering and animal cruelty turns, basically everyone off. Seeing these images turns people off. Like the amount of people that, that stare at it and they look away, they can't handle it. How can this be our natural diet if we can't even stand the sight of it? If we, we'd be a pretty terrible carnivore if we, we need to do this sort of stuff to survive, and we can't even bear the thought of, harming animals. We invite animals into our home. We love them. It's so counterintuitive to our direct nature. So, and which is why, more and more people are making this switch as the information does get out there, as it's getting out there, which is wonderful. People are doing so, and we're heading in the right direction. It's not going to happen overnight, obviously, unfortunately, but it's heading in the right direction. Ben Johnstone is our guest this hour. Ben is live on the line to us from Sydney. I'm delighted he's come on, and he's an activist, as Ben. He's been describing how he reaches out to people on the streets of Sydney to ask them to think about our relationship with animals who share the planet with us, and eating animals and what happens to animals, and veganism. Ironically, Ben, I think, would have a bit of sympathy with me when it comes to man-made climate change. I think, Ben, you might be sceptical about the IPCC science. That's ironic because today, obviously, the United Nations are saying that one of the ways we can combat climate change is by eating a plant-based diet. I'm guessing some vegan activists, and I hate labeling people, but let's just say some vegan activists, whatever their opinions on climate change might be, they might welcome this, Ben. Well, I think most vegan activists, or most vegans in general, would have, bought into this. I always find it quite interesting and, amusing in an ironic way that, they've seen in this aspect anyway. Obviously, there's so many other aspects of our lives that are, that are hidden from us, and all the stuff that goes on. But in this aspect, they've seen through, the nonsense about needing, to eat animals and everything like that. So in that sense, they've seen through it. But they buy the lie hook, line and sinker about, the environmental aspect. And don't get me wrong, there are some real and legitimate environmental concerns that animal agriculture plays into. But yeah, the whole human caused climate change thing, it's an absolute nonsense. And I do bring it up as often as I can, with my fellow activists and other people on the street when it comes up. And it's quite heartening in the fact that so many of the people that, fundamentally would have believed this, as, there was a time, a very, very long time ago, when I believed it as well, like long before I went vegan. I was terrified of, what I thought was going to happen to the planet. But I have a lot of sympathy with these people, to the extent that if they don't know, then you can't do anything about something that you don't know. But when you're presented with the information, as I try to do with them as much as possible, and what's getting out there now as well, then surely critical thinking should enter in, and regardless of their opinion of the legitimate aspects of the environmental concerns around veganism and animal agriculture, then surely they should be able to call out this nonsense for what it is, because that's what it is for me, an absolute nonsense.
How do you get on with with your fellow activists when you say, look, I'm not convinced that CO2 made by man is having an impact on the climate, because we often talk about. I mean, you made a good point in your email. I was a bit childish about some of the God, what are they called again? The group.
Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction Rebellion. Yeah, I mean, I was a bit silly. I do get a bit childish from time to time. I hope it doesn't offend people. I hope people see through that it's just me being childish. But I think I do make an interesting point when I suggest that maybe some of those early university graduates, like early to mid 20s, or high school graduates, they don't do well when they're challenged or when somebody disagrees with them. At least I don't think so, Ben. Maybe I'm wrong. So when you introduce, because you're committed to veganism and to animal welfare and to stopping the slaughter of animals, they are as well. And then you say, hey, by the way, I don't think that man's CO2 is going to kill us all. How did they react to that?
Well, it's brought about a few interesting conversations. For the most part, like I said, people they're open to it and they'll listen, which is a wonderful thing. I've brought it up with some people on the street. Like usually, for the most part, I'm obviously there to speak about the ethical considerations of veganism, and sometimes the environment comes up. If that's something people want to focus on more than the ethics, then I'll speak to them on the level that they want to speak to. And I don't specifically go out of my way to talk about man-made climate change and the nonsense I think it is. But if it comes up, then I'll definitely go into it. And I've certainly had reactions from people, they'll just turn off even if they were on board with what I was saying in terms of veganism, they'll just instantly shut off, which is, quite unfortunate in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm going to speak my truth regardless of, people's perceptions of it. But I think it speaks a lot to, towards, the human condition and how, they would have been on board with something, for the most part, in terms of the ethical aspects of veganism. Then just because I say something they don't agree with, boom, they might instantly just, put veganism to the wayside and not want to look into it again. So there is that aspect of it as well. But for the most part, people are willing to listen. And I put forward, I think, a fairly cogent, argument with a lot of facts and things like that as well. And at the end of the day, all I say is, well, you don't have to believe me about anything that I say. Go and look into it for yourself. And I think if they're capable of objectively looking into the situation, then they should come to the same conclusion.
Good stuff. I like that at the end. A little bit arrogant. No harm in that. I'm twice as arrogant as that sometimes. But no, I like that. Fair enough. Loads of tweets. Let's get into a few of them. I want to ask you about the health aspects in a minute, because that's very important. I've loads of questions for you between now and the top of the hour. Thanks for staying up. I'd have been a right bastard now if I'd have just given you 10 minutes. You stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's have a chat with Ben. Now, I'm delighted Ben is on. This is a very important issue, and I've had listeners email me over the last couple of years and they've condemned me for not really getting into this issue, because it means a lot to people and it means a lot to our audience. And I think people who consume the independent media, I think, have a lot of sympathy with this subject. So mea culpa, we should get into it more often. We're introducing it to the show with Ben Johnstone from Sydney. He's an activist. Delighted that he's on the line. Let me read a few tweets. We'll talk about the health aspects of it. But before we talk about the health aspects, we're going to talk about militantism, if there's such a word. Because you don't sound like a militant, Ben. But we have one or two, and they tend to be famous and they tend to put people off. So I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. Chris says, if we're swapping diet-changing stories, Richie, when I was 19 or 20 in the late 80s, I was a big Paul Weller fan. And I read in Smash Hits maybe that Paul was a veggie, and I copied him. It pissed my mother right off that Christmas. But I never missed meat, and it makes perfect sense for health, says Chris. Thanks for that, Chris. Mad Monk tweets, may I recommend a book called A Fast Food Nation? I am like you, Richie. I do source animals raised where I can see they are treated correctly. I know Ben would disagree with this, Mad Monk, but anyway, I'll read the rest of the tweet. I do buy them or source them where I can see they are treated correctly. No slaughterhouse involved. The animal doesn't see the end coming. It's quick and done as dignified as possible, says Mad Monk. And Patricia tweets, my decision to become vegan just happened. Something inside of me changed over 30 years ago. I'm convinced that animals are intelligent. They know when they are about to be slaughtered. I don't want that fear inside my body. If people feel differently, no judgment. They are intelligent. And before we talk about militantism, there is no such word. People who behave in a militant way. And then before we move on to talking about the health aspect of veganism, she makes a good point there. Do we really have any real understanding of how intelligent animals are? Maybe they are vastly more intelligent than we think.
Oh, sorry, was that a question for me, mate? Sorry, I didn't know whether it was rhetorical or not.
Yeah, no, a question. I mean, we look at animals and we think, right, they're bright, they're aware of their surroundings, they interact with human beings. That's most of our understanding, but maybe they're capable of much more than that we're not aware of. Maybe they're more aware of what's going on.
It sort of depends how you define intelligence, really. Like there's that quote, if you judge, was it a fish by its ability to climb a tree? It'll always seem, like an idiot or whatever it is. So, are animals in general capable of, the complex reasoning that we're capable of? No, probably not. But in their own individual ways, they're amazing, intelligent, sentient beings. And whether I don't care whether they're the smartest thing in the room or the dumbest thing in the room. At the end of the day, no one deserves the kind of treatment that they're given. Whether it's based on intelligence or not. But yeah, they're fascinating in so many ways to get into. And these individual traits, these individual farmed animals in general, and in their natural behavior, in the natural environment and the natural behaviors and things like that, it's fascinating. The kind of behaviors that we deprive them through the treatment, the conditions that they're given. So
good stuff, Ben. Morrissey once said he couldn't be friends with somebody who ate meat, and Morrissey is Morrissey. He's an arsehole of a diva. Much as we love the Smiths, and much as we love most of his early solo work, he's fantastic, great Mancunian. Lives in LA now, I believe. Fan. And you're a Smiths fan, right? So we share that great music. Only listening to Hatful of Hollow today while I was preparing for this. So there you are. There must have been something in the air. So you're on, Ben. So Morrissey, right now, I discovered that Morrissey's not alone, and I don't know if we could call this militant behaviour. Do you feel like that? I mean, how many of your fellow activists would look upon people who do eat meat as, I don't know, I wouldn't say second-class citizens, but less than, less moral, less human? I don't know. Is that something that is a real thing?
Well, I suppose it's in our nature to look down at people for all sorts of reasons, whether it's veganism or anything else like that. And there is, I suppose, a tendency in veganism, not that veganism has anything to do with a leftist mindset or a progressive mindset, but I would say that there is a higher proportion of, a progressive mentality within the vegan movement for various reasons. And that can bring about all sorts of issues that I would want to counter as well, because it can be quite problematic. But I mean, absolutely it exists. I would say it's counterproductive. It's not really going to get you anywhere. Interacting with people on the level that they come to you at, and having respectful engagements with them and stuff like that. That's always where it's going to be. Shouting and carrying on. It really, might make you feel good for a moment inside, but it's never really going to get you anywhere. It's always, having meaningful, down to earth interactions with people. That's always, the best option as far as I'm concerned, and that's what I've seen. That's the best option. That's the best outcomes I always have with people. So,
but if I was in Sydney now, and this program is coming from there, and I know that you listen in occasionally, and I know that you like some of the stuff, and we were to meet up and have a couple of beers, could our relationship develop? I mean, could we become mates, you, me, and our partners, or would it be difficult for you? Because I'm, even though not much these days, and who knows, maybe someday real soon, maybe I'll cut meat out of my diet entirely. And I'm not just saying that. I've been thinking about this for a couple of years. It's been in my brain. It won't get out of my brain. But just imagine that it wouldn't leave my brain and that I would just eat meat. Would that be a problem for you? Be honest now, Ben.
Oh, I'll always be honest. Would I like it? No, I mean, absolutely not. It's something that I so fundamentally disagree with, and something that, it's such a big part of my life trying to eradicate. Obviously, people that I'm close to that engage in it, do I like it? No. Does it mean that I can't form, meaningful relationships with those people? Absolutely not. It's quite an interesting thing. Like in vegan activism, you'll find that it's so much easier for people to speak about veganism to strangers than with family. Like I've probably helped hundreds of people go vegan, but yet not a single person in my family will take anything I say seriously or listen to me. So it can be quite a big issue for people, especially when you connect to something as most ethical vegans do. Once they make that connection, it's such a meaningful, powerful thing. And there's a lot of similarities between that and waking up to what's going on with just the world in general, and the Illuminati, the hidden hand, all the things that happen in the world as well. I think there's so many similarities between trying to speak to people about, vaccines or 9/11 or, the monetary system and things like that. And have, despite all the evidence and everything like that, no one wants to no one wants a bar of you, and then trying to speak to people about veganism. So it can be quite a difficult thing as well. So for the most part, if it's going to be an issue, then it's obviously better off just keeping your interactions away from food and things like that as well. So you'll have people that won't eat around, people that are eating meat, which is something that I must admit I do like to do as well. I'd much rather, engage with people socially away from that sort of thing, because it is something that bothers me.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's not something that would ever stop me from having meaningful interactions and meaningful relationships with people that don't do it. But at the same time, I think, having, respectful, decent conversations with people, and, if people are, I think it goes both ways as well. If, people want to engage in something that's so fundamentally opposed to, the way someone feels, then having a meaningful dialogue about it, is the least someone could do as well. So
yeah, fair enough. And as much of a diva as Morrissey is, I think he's passionately committed to how he feels and his belief. I remember criticising him when he threatened to discontinue a concert when he could smell the barbecues from the vans at the back of the field. And I remember giving him dog's abuse for that, if I'd have paid for a ticket. But at the same time, I can't live my life like that as I get older, constantly condemning people without just for a second trying to think about what he might be feeling. And totally committed to it as he obviously is. It's obviously distressing for him to be up there and smelling that. I know other people might say, well, then just don't do live concerts then. But look, it's another thing. Ben Johnstone is our guest. Now, the health. Ben is a vegan and he's an animal welfare activist. He works to expose the industry, the slaughter industry, the meat industry, and the bad practices in it. I know Ben thinks it's a bad practice, full stop, and I respect him feeling that way. A lot of people, as you quite rightly pointed out a short time ago, are looking at it from a health point of view. Maybe not because they're worried about animal welfare, which is another thing entirely, but they're thinking, I'm going to feel better. I've read something in a magazine, so I'm going to do it. Give us the facts. No cherry picking, my friend. Give us the facts about vegan diet. What changes positively is somebody likely to undergo once they cut meat out of their diet entirely?
Well, obviously, it's strange how we almost solely focus on meat as the focal point of the food that we eat. But, dairy and eggs is such a massive part of it as well. And, I mean, a strong case could be made about how, much worse dairy and eggs are for us, over meat. Although, once again, I would say that's all completely unnecessary. Ethical veganism at its heart, it isn't really about health or the environment, but I'm certainly happy to touch on it. So I'll just read something then, and maybe we can focus in on or answer what other questions you might have. But this is the position statement from the American Academy of Dietetics, which basically says that it is the position of the ADA that appropriately planned vegan diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegan diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence, and for athletes. So, obviously in terms of whether it's better for us or not, like I always, for the most part, I try to avoid this discussion with people unless they really want to solely focus on it, because then you get people that say, that really want to nail down on, and it's such a massive topic in terms of, how, the human diet and, the way that the body works and human physiology. Obviously, there could be a panel of plant-based doctors and things like that, and even they wouldn't be able to cover it. So me as a non-doctor or a non-scientist, it's such a big thing to get into. But I mean, you got all these bad things in meat, like heme iron, the iron that's found in meat. It does all sorts of terrible things. Once again, I can go into it in more detail if you want, like animal protein and all the issues that it's been linked with in the diet and things like that as well. So I mean, I can go into more in like cholesterol or saturated fat, which are so predominant in these products as well. If there's anything in particular you want to nail down and then ask me, but otherwise it's such a massive topic. It's really a massive one, yeah.
And I think there's no doubt we'll do this again, you and I. I think we could do that again and get into it in more depth. But just generally, because I have read a number of different journalists in the UK press, and one or two of them adopted a vegan diet for a short time. So I think one or two of them might have kept going with it just to settle the argument for themselves. And I think unanimously they said that they felt it was much better. They lost a bit of weight, but not too much weight. They seemed to be healthier, brighter, slept better, that sort of stuff. And I know it might be a bit unfair to you now to be getting into generalities, but just because of time constraints, that's what fascinated me. And I know that a lot of impressionable people, maybe younger people, are concerned about the environment, concerned about their appearance maybe, have gone, right, we're going to go for it on that basis. And generally the consensus tends to be, yes, I do feel better, I have healthier skin, brighter eyes, and I'm sleeping better. And that's generally what I read. And it's not from progressive, lefty, liberal newspapers either. It's from right across the spectrum, Ben. What do you think?
No, there's a massive and growing body of independent research that isn't tainted by these industries, because for so long, I mean, things like, milk does the body good, and the idea that you need, milk to have strong bones, or the idea that you need meat to pack on muscle or anything like that. This is marketing and pseudoscience. There's absolutely nothing behind it. But the growing body of independent information about what the human body actually is and what it needs to feed it, and what these products, animal products, are actually doing to us. I mean, I would argue, and the research is sort of backing me up, is that so many of the diseases that are the leading causes of death and disease in the Western world, are being fueled by our dietary choices. And obviously processed food, whether it's animal or not animal, plays a part. Environmental aspects absolutely play a part. I wouldn't dispute that for a second. But I think it's something like 12 or 13 of the leading 15 causes of death can be directly attributable back to diet. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's not broccoli and kale and apples and oranges that are, giving people heart disease and cancers and all these various things. And like I said, it is such a massive topic that it's so hard to do it justice in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and there's loads of questions we can jump into. Let's do a show in the autumn. And we'll get into that more generally. And because you've got contacts, you can bring somebody, you can put us in touch with somebody, and we'll do a 3 or a 4-way conference call on the show about this, because we've had a lot of interest in it tonight. I knew we would, because I knew that a lot of my listeners would be vegetarian or would be vegan. I knew that, Ben. This is why it's been on my mind for ages to come at the topic properly. Samantha tweets, Richie, I've tried going vegan, found it hard as a lot of the food is packed with sugars, which I have to be careful with, so it's hard. I do eat vegan if I'm out eating with a vegan person, though. A lot of the food, she reckons, is packed with sugars. Any truth to that?
Well, I mean, it's obviously going to depend what food we're talking about. Obviously, I mean, processed food is always going to have some amount of preservatives and things like that. So obviously would differentiate between being, at the end of the day, I mean, I just want people to go vegan. Obviously, I absolutely want people to be healthy, but, there's an unhealthy and a healthy way to be vegan. Like, you can drink nothing but, energy drinks and eat nothing but Oreo cookies and be vegan, and you're not going to be healthy doing that. Obviously, being, a whole foods vegan, eating foods, as close to the natural state as possible is the healthiest way to go. And what so much of the research tells us is, optimal for our health, and in terms of treating and even preventing certain diseases and things like that. I would think salt's more of an issue than sugar in certain processed foods, but without knowing the exact foods, it's hard for me to say.
Oh, I think you're right about the salt. I did a show on this a couple of years ago about processed foods in Iceland and Sainsbury's and all the others. Dreadful, really. And you feel sorry for low income families, because often it's all they can afford, and the foods there's little or no nutrition in a lot of this stuff. Sean tweets that since he went vegetarian 3 months ago, he doesn't have as much anger issues. That's really interesting. He's lost a stone in weight, and the dairy products that he uses are ethically sourced. So he's vegetarian but not vegan. Doesn't have as much issue with anger, doesn't get as frustrated, that's good, with life, and has lost a stone in weight. I'm sure if we stayed on for a couple of hours, there's no doubt that we would hear more of that. But we had one from Cartoon Drunk here. There is a dissenter, Ben, a dissenter in the ranks.
Good.
Richie, yeah, it's good. Yeah, Richie. Maybe Ben dodged the question about the carnivore animals, because since the Jurassic era, animals have been killing other animals in a violent way for food. And wouldn't it be difficult to grow enough crops without mass deforestation if everyone went vegan? So if the whole planet went vegan, it'd be very difficult to grow enough crops to support that, says Cartoon Drunk. Interesting point. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't think I dodged the issue, but I mean, in terms of his comment about the crops, the exact opposite's true. So roughly speaking, I mean, it depends what crop we're talking about in what country, but just generally speaking, around half the crops we grow on the face of the earth right now, the edible crops that we could eat, we feed to animals, and the amount of calories that we get back from those animals in terms of the food that we feed to them is anywhere from 3 to 6 times less efficient than if we ate it ourselves. So there's different figures around exactly how many more people we could feed, just with the current amount of crops we grow right now on a vegan diet, as opposed to, the current diet that most people are eating. But it's somewhere between 1 and 4 billion people more could eat with just the food that we're eating right now, if we just ate the plants that we have right now, rather than eating the animals that we've fed the plants to and things like that. So that question, it's just demonstrably false, or that comment's demonstrably false in terms of the amount of crops that we're growing right now. It would be incredibly easy. There would obviously be issues around transferring it, because so much of the crops that we're feeding to animals are like GM corn and GM soy and everything like that, and that's not healthy for anyone to eat, whether it's an animal eating it that we're in turn eating or eating it ourselves. But no, there's no issues around the amount of land currently used to grow crops for us to eat it ourselves. So.
Good stuff. That's answered that one. Jason tweets, maybe Sean has less aggression because he's not producing as much testosterone. Thanks, Jason. And Jim disagrees. Jim says, a lot of mistruths here with Ben, Richie. Saturated fat and meat are essential for a good diet. Many high-profile vegans have bailed out due to bad health. I get the animal welfare angle, but it is a very bad diet. And I'm a nutritionist, by the way, says Jim. Ben, what do you think?
There's at the end of the day, I was actually speaking to a nutritionist on the streets of Sydney a few hours ago before I came home, and she had absolutely no idea what we're going on about. There's absolutely no need for saturated fat. Do we need fat in our diet? Absolutely, but saturated fat from animal products, there's absolutely no need for it. And what it's actually doing to our body in terms of fueling things like heart disease and everything like that, the evidence is stacked completely in my favour. I'd be happy to go into it in a bit more detail, in a future program. But as far as I'm concerned, there's like I said, do we need fat? Absolutely, but there's all sorts of much more beneficial fats available from plant sources like nuts and avocados and things like that. We absolutely don't need fat from animals. Every single vitamin, nutrient, and mineral that the human body needs is available from the plant kingdom. There's nothing that you have to get from meat or any other animal product, with the possible exception of B12. But the issue around B12 is, it's actually a bacteria. It's not a vitamin or a mineral, and it would naturally grow in the soil and in water sources and things like that. And when we led much more earth-connected lives, we'd be drinking from streams and eating much more like fruits and vegetables that are grown in the soil. But because we treat our water to such a degree and spray all sorts of chemicals all over the soil, it's killing those natural B12 sources and things like that. And we're even finding that they're actually having to supplement them in animals now as well, because animals aren't even getting the amount of B12 that they need. So that's the only possible issue. And most vegans will supplement with B12, but everything else completely available from a plant-based diet.
There's so much wrong with our farming. We'll go out the way we came in. There's so much wrong with farming. Keeping animals, I know that full stop. I'm acknowledging Ben's point is it doesn't matter whether animals are treated well or not. We shouldn't be killing them for food. And Ben believes that. And, I've got friends and I've known people over the years who believe that passionately. That's Ben's point, because I know he'll be frustrated with me talking about ethical farming because you don't believe it's possible. But there are so many problems with the farming. The antibiotics is a massive one that we didn't touch on, and what that's doing to people. And people are not aware of that. But I'd like to go out where we came in, keeping animals cooped up, where they're kicked and beaten and abused. Not always, but in many cases they are, by stressed people who've been driven to distraction by the very nature of the thing they're doing, which is horrendous. Because I'll admit it, it is hypocritical. For me, if I do happen to be at a barbecue on my 2-week holiday, and if I do have a hamburger, it's hypocritical. Knowing that might have come from an animal that was beaten and abused and kicked and went out of the world screaming. There's a lot wrong with farming. There really is. And I'd be very interested when we come back after our summer break, and we'll get into this again with your permission, even though it's a strange time for you, of course, to be doing this with me, Ben. But, has any of our listeners, had a moment of pause while listening to this and maybe thought, well, I'm going to think about this and maybe I'm going to try it for a while? I'm nearly there, I think. I really am. I'm not just saying I'm not there yet, but I'm nearly there, where I might just give it a go and say, right, I'm going to stop now for a number of reasons. The issues with the treatment of animals obviously being important, and health, of course, as well. I'm not going to be a virtue signaler. There is a selfish element, but the treatment of animals is something that I do think about quite a lot. People should watch Dominion, watch the film, but there are other very well made films as well. You might say they're very subjective, they might very well be, but even if they are subjective, the events portrayed in the film are real. They happened, whether the filmmakers are subjective or not. I'm going to give you the final word, my friend. Thanks for connecting with me. Thanks for listening to the programme and spreading the word about it. And thanks for having the humility to come on a program and speak to somebody who has a different point of view than you and who does eat meat. I really appreciate that. I'm moved by that, Ben. So I'll give you the final word, my friend, and thanks for staying up late in Sydney tonight to talk to us. Go ahead.
Oh no, it's an honour and a privilege to talk to you, mate. It's the only way we'll ever progress forward is talking to the people that that we disagree with, whether it's on this issue or any of the other issues that we that we face in the current climate. It's a wonderful thing for me to be able to go out there and talk to people. And you're right, it is such. In some ways, I sort of sit there and I pause when I'm not speaking to someone on the streets, and I think it's just such a wonderful thing that I have this ability to. And people are willing to stop and talk about this issue, and just general interactions and people being people and having a discussion. And even if, some people will agree with what I'm saying and they'll, make changes, and some people won't. But I generally love having a chat about this topic because it is such a, it's divisive and contentious, but not necessarily in a negative way. Like, everyone's got an opinion on it, and it's definitely something that's going to, obviously run, and it's going to be an issue of increasing prevalence moving forward. But it's been an honour to chat to you, and have a wonderful holiday. You certainly deserve it. So, cheers, mate, and thanks for that. And do come back again in the autumn. Let's do it now, and we'll open the phones. We'll do that. We'll get We'll do it on Skype. We'll open up Skype and we'll get people to come on, and maybe Jim, the nutritionist, might want to come on and have his say. And we'll do it in the spirit of decency and not transparency, but open dialogue with people that we respect. And I wasn't again patronising you or anybody else when I said that I'm not far off giving it a go. I'm not far off doing a few things. Cutting alcohol completely out of my life is one, which I'm determined to do. At some stage, I'm not a crazy drinker, but I want to do that. But I also I'm nearly there with vegetarianism. Say, I don't know if I could not eat fish, but we could talk about that in the future. Mate, you're a gent, and I'm glad you came on. It's been educational for me. Thanks for doing it, and as I said, let's do it again in the autumn, Ben. Thanks so much, mate. You're welcome, mate. Whenever you want me, I'll come on. So,
be brilliant to have you on. Thanks, Ben. Ben Johnstone there in Sydney, and the film that Ben participated in is called Dominion. And again, I couldn't lie and say I watched all of it today. I didn't, but I watched quite a few segments of it, and it's a really important film, I think. Congratulations to the filmmakers. Not an easy watch, but if you want to know more about this issue, watch that film and check it out. Thanks to Ben Johnstone there in Sydney, Australia. The time is exactly 5 minutes to the top of the hour, and I'm going to take my leave of you, only for a short while. I'm bloody knackered. Anybody who watched the YouTube live stream this morning, you would have heard me talking about it. It's been a tough whole year. It's been an eventful bloody year, this. I'm very sick back in February with the pneumonia, and then we had the move, and that meant that I've not had a break since Christmas. I've done, including the YouTube live streams, which are an hour, and they are prepared, and the radio show. I've done nearly 170 live shows this year, and that's tough, that. I'm not looking for sympathy. I said this on the radio show this morning, on the live stream. I don't want any sympathy. I don't deserve any. I have the best job in the world. I love doing it, but it's bloody hard, and I'm tired, and I'm looking forward to a couple of weeks off now. I said this morning that I might do a newspaper review tomorrow. Sod that. No, I'm not. I'm away now for 2 weeks. In fact, I return after Bank Holiday Monday. So the Bank Holiday is Monday the 26th of August. I'll be back on Tuesday the 27th. I'll have Nicholas Wilson with me, Mr. Ethical, and he's got mind-blowing things going on in his life at the moment. So he'll be on to talk to me on the 27th. But until then, I won't be on Twitter. I don't do Facebook anyway. I'm going to disappear and stay at home and chill and listen to a few records. And don't miss me. Don't miss the show. Get out and about and get away from this crazy information and this mad stuff that we have to deal with, and spend a bit of time in whatever sunshine remains of the summer. That's what I would suggest anyway. So there you go. Thanks to my guests tonight. It was fascinating chatting with Jim Fetzer earlier on, and Ben Johnstone, a real gentleman from Sydney, Australia, who's a vegan and an animal welfare activist. I thought he was brilliant, and I look forward to speaking with him again in the future. We'll get an old debate going some night, I think, on Skype, and we'll get all angles on this, because there are people who think it is a lunatic progressive lefty thing, veganism, but it actually isn't. It's about a lot more than, swampy types, hemp wearing types. It's a lot more than that. So we'll get into that in the future. It's been a mad year so far. But I have to say this. I never thought I'd say it, because I'm one of those guys. I've lived in many different places in Europe and even around the world. And I'm a guy who would have always said that wherever I lay my hat is my home. I could live anywhere. I'm not too particular, I would have thought. But you know what? I've come to love this place. And this place is Salford. And I'm a proud Salfordian. Speak to you on the 27th of August. Love you lots. Until then, it's bye for me. Look after yourselves and one another. This is the brilliant Shane McGowan. From this dirty old town, it's bye for me. Speak real soon. Bye now.